Today, I'm going to talk about hauntings, both narrative and figurative, in the digital game PT. It took all of a day for players to collectively complete the game and determine that it was, in fact, a playable trailer for the upcoming and unannounced Silent Hills game, the latest entry in the Silent Hill franchise by Konami, which would be directed by Guillermo del Toro and Hideo Kojima. On the 29th of April 2015, amidst a bad breakup with Hideo Kojima, Konami cancelled Silent Hills and removed PT from the PlayStation Store. In addition, blocking players' ability to re-download the game from the store. As such, PT only exists on PS4 hard drives that had the game installed prior to its deletion from the store. The game's removal accompanied the cancellation of Silent Hills, and fans lamented the loss of not only the potential new Silent Hill game, but the loss of PT itself, which had become much loved in the gaming community, despite the fact that it existed solely to sell a video game that didn't exist yet. To play PT is to consort with a ghost. Not only do the game's antagonist Lisa and her ghostly fetus haunt the player character throughout the hallways of the house, but the game itself seems to haunt the player user by infiltrating the very hardware that the player is using to play the game. Some of this possession seems to be intentional design and functions as in-game mechanics. For example, around cycle 19 or 20, depending on how finicky the playthrough, the player must stand perfectly still, as Lisa approaches their avatar from behind in order to hold the protagonist's hand. During this time, the DualShock 4 rumbles as it essentially becomes Lisa's hand, and Lisa reaches through the hardware of the PS4 to touch not only the protagonist, but the player themselves. While this is super interesting, the possession on which I wish to focus here is not the possession that occurs when Lisa reaches through the hardware, but the possession of the game itself, regardless of whether or not it is installed or absent from any particular PS4 unit. PT embodies a void in the archive, a vast space left vacant by games destroyed, unsupported, erased, cancelled, or otherwise inaccessible to players. In Keeping Games Alive, Video Game Archiving and Preservation, Bex Hernandez argues that the preservation and archiving of video games, quote, requires continued access to video games as cultural artifacts in their own right, and continued access to video games as significant objects for particular subcultures. The key word here is continued. This word indicates that owning a game like PT, preserving it, if you will, through your ownership, is not sufficient for the archival work that surrounds games. Rather, the game, in order to be sufficiently archived, needs to be made available, which, of course, for PT is an untenable requirement. Attempts to recreate the game, such as Farhan Qureshi's Punity, attempts to generate documentation of the game, such as various YouTube Let's Plays by the likes of, say, PewDiePie, attempts to save every PS4 that has the game installed on its hard drive. These are insufficient. These gestures are insufficient in the face of the fact that PT's influence on the gaming world is dwarfed by its inaccessibility on a large scale. And even if someone were to recreate the game, line by line, an identical game, it still would not be PT, divorced from the context of PT's development, publication, and distribution. This is not to say that these projects of preservation are without merit at all. In fact, it's quite the opposite, given that they are the only way in which new players can now access PT, but only that they are exercises in facsimile. PT exemplifies the ephemeral nature of digital games through its fragility in the archive. In a sense, the game is always already deleted. The player cannot experience the game without considering and risking its deletion from their collection. But unlike other concepts of always already, such as in Marx or Derrida, the player needs not experience the deletion of the game in order to have always had the game deleted. The game is deleted even as you play it, for unlike games with standing seeds available from the PlayStation Store, say Dark Souls 3, to cite an example that has recently taken over my entire damn life, PT does not exist as a sufficiently archivable text even during the active engagement/consumption. It is a ghost in your PlayStation 4. It is the real threat in PT, not the character of Lisa, no matter how terrifying she is. I found myself actively avoiding games with glitches that might require me to reinitialize my PS4 system, such as The Elder Scrolls Online, in order to preserve my PT file. When my PS4's hard drive died on the 27th of January 2016, God rest its soul, I was devastated. I knew that there would be nothing that Sony could do to restore the game to my hard drive. The game was irreplaceable, unlike everything else on my PlayStation 4. In order to capture footage for this paper, I had to entreat my friends to play through the game, not an easy task to convince people to play PT, on their systems, and I guided them through the game's cycles using the PlayStation 4 party chat. Each one of them was painfully aware of the game's instability as they navigated the hallway over and over again, aware that at any second, the game could just disappear from their PlayStation 4s. This would, of course, leave a void in their archives, a tile on the PS4's interface that connects to nothing. Retroactively, the game itself seems to comment on its own ephemerality. Several cycles in, the radio broadcaster seems to become possessed as he entreats you to, quote, look behind you, which, when done, reveals nothing but the empty hallway, and you are permitted to continue gameplay. Watch this clip.
After neighbors called 911, found the father in his car listening to the radio. 7 days before the murder, look behind you. I said, look behind you, like he was chanting some strange spell.
It's not until a cycle or two later, depending, again, how finicky the game, as this is where it starts to get a little weird, when you try to turn again, and then turn back to your front, that Lisa attacks you, and the game is interrupted by your death and subsequent implied sexual assault. Watch this clip, with warning that it is graphic.
Shot him too. His 6-year-old daughter had the good sense to hide in the bathroom, but reports suggest he lured her out by telling her it was just a game. The girl was found shot once in the chest from point-blank range. The mother, who was shot...
The demand that the radio broadcaster makes of the player mimics the very nature of PT as a text. Looking behind at the game is uneventful until the moment at which you are acutely aware of the game's deletion by your interruption to the narrative. This small moment in the game stands for the act of preserving video games altogether. That the interruption to access, represented by the moment that Lisa kills the player character, comes with the realization that just like Lisa was always behind or in front of them, the game was always already deleted, that digital games face so many archival issues that they are, in fact, a spectral art form. In Preservation of the Video Game, Alison M. Hudgens states, quote, the most urgent concern for preservation may be the rapid physical deterioration of games and the little time left to save certain formats, some of which have only a few decades before components break down. Other challenges include a lack of interest in preservation, aggressive copyright protection, and high costs associated with their preservation. But what about when the code becomes unavailable in some way? When it corrupts, or when it gets deleted? The issue that faces PT is not simply that the PS4 and its associated components are fragile objects subject to deterioration, but that the code of a digital game itself is also an object subject to destruction and erasure. PT seems to exist as a limit case for the vulnerability of the digital game as a medium, the extreme scenario in which a game is relegated to memory, both human and PlayStation, at the behest of a spiteful publisher, a willful anti-archival gesture meant to erase the game from existence, one dying PS4 hard drive at a time. As with many games lost or non-preservable, the weight of each loss of PT is a heavy, physical loss. The code of PT constitutes part of the tapestry that is digital games, capital D, capital G, and that portion of the tapestry is in danger of disappearing, leaving a blank space in its wake, as though the game has never existed, and was in fact gone, even as players awoke in the waking room.